Hi all, Rick here. The Cardassian Union's relation with the Federation is pretty well known, in that for the most part of their existence they were antagonistic and even downright enemies at several points. This changed with the close of the Dominion War, the exact nature of which is still unestablished, but it seems they are at the least still rather standoffish. What is less known is the relationship between Cardassia and another long-standing rival of Starfleet, the Romulan Star Empire. These two share a lot in common, in particular their favouritism of propaganda, managed information and state control over their population, although Cardassia seems more militant. On the surface, these two powers should be pretty much aligned and even maybe work together for common goals, like opposing the UFP. However, this is not always the case. We know that the Romulans maintain an embassy with Cardassia, something they don't afford the Federation, meaning that they at least have a better relationship with one another than the Star Empire does with the UFP. However, that has worked to their disservice in the past too, with Elim Garak insinuating that while he was a part of the Obsidian Order, he may have poisoned the proconsul of the time for political reasons. So it seems that the two powers were not allies in any sense, with not even their mutual disrespect of the Federation being enough to draw up an official alliance between them. Personally, I believe this to be simply because the Romulans never have made an enduring peace treaty with anyone because they're too paranoid of a government, isolating themselves from the Federation from 2311 to 2364. They had a very brief exchange of tech with the Klingon Empire, which did not last long, and were prepared to support House Duras in their bid to take over the Empire. Meanwhile, the Cardassians also did not ally with anyone, preferring instead to simply annex and conquer other territories, forcing their populace into servitude. The Romulan Star Empire pretty much did this too, and while you'd expect them to therefore have a lot in common, such forms of expansionism are incompatible when and if they finally meet. In fact, it seems that Cardassia shared the common opinion of the Star Empire, that they were cunning, deceptive, and preferred to make manipulative plays from the shadows. The Romulans saw the Cardassians as something to keep an eye on, with their operations not a problem to the Star Empire interests, but marked to likely become an issue in the future, considering the Union's proclivity towards similar tactics of coercion and manipulation as the Empire. Because of this, their best defence against the Union was to keep them guessing, maintain their air of civility and diplomacy with them, while intentionally making it known to Cardassia that they were hiding a dagger behind their back. In this way, they kept the Cardassians from trying anything, but ultimately, each knew that it was likely they would clash at some point. One of the biggest interactions we see is that of the Tal Shiar and Obsidian Order's short-lived alliance to try to launch a preemptive strike on the Dominion. Now, this alliance was one that was organised in secret without the sanction of either government, and saw the exchange of intel and technology. While the plan was unveiled before the attempted attack, the official announcements came as they approached the wormhole, to which each government denounced the operation, but also made no moves to hinder it, partly because it was already underway, but mostly because, if it worked, then the head of the Dominion would have been severed and war averted. Even Starfleet chose not to interfere. However, the resulting battle had been compromised by a changeling infiltrator, and the Battle of the Amarian Nebula was little more than the throwing away of lives, ships, and two of the most effective intelligence agencies in the quadrants. In the following landscape, the Cardassian Union was crippled and then preyed upon by the Klingon Empire, thanks to more manipulations, while the Romulan Star Empire immediately sought to remove itself from more harm by remaining neutral. We can also look at the physical locations of the systems mentioned to be near the border of the two powers. Several times in the course of the Dominion War, it is mentioned that the Romulans and Cardassians share a border. Yet, on star charts and maps that have been released out of the universe, before being canonised, we have yet to see an actual border between the two powers. For a large amount of time in Trek's history, this was why we seldom got accurate and detailed maps of the galaxy, to avoid inconsistencies like this. But nonetheless, it's a detail that might be fun to poke at. The Vera system is shown to be north of the Talarian Republic and rather deep in Cardassian space, in fact, rather far away from the Federation border. Unroth is shown to be on the Romulan side in the Anais sector and was mentioned to be near the border by Breen Commander Thot Gore. Maps have shown this on screen as being both in Klingon territory during the War of 2257 and then in the Romulan hands 2 years later. It's also mentioned in Beta Canon to be a planetary system that the NX-01 Enterprise had been investigating in Minefield. The Glintara sector was described as being somewhere between the two powers and close enough to Romulus to act as a tactical staging ground for an invasion. This was a system named in the falsified report created by the Federation to bring the Romulans into the war, but it needed to be a credible location. Maps have placed Glintara in the neighbouring system to Romulus, spilling over the northern edge of the neutral zone. It's apparently also the location of Deep Space 4 and nearby to the world of Nimbus 3. So as we can see in extra canonical content, none of these locations are exactly near each other, let alone a Cardassian border with Romulan space, so what could explain these discrepancies? Well, besides the demands of the plot in the fictional universe, a common criticism of most stellar maps we see in Trek is that they are seeing a 2D representation of a 3D space. While we see the large UFP space in between these two areas, there in fact could be a connecting area above that ends in a shared Cardassian-Romulan border. Personally, I think this is too big a deviation for even apocryphal maps to simply ignore, and therefore they take into account the widest points of each territory. Another idea is that an area now marked on the maps as Federation or even Romulan territory was once considered Cardassian, either through some colonies or annexation of a system during a more aggressive Cardassian expansion. The northern area might have changed hands post-war, or have been considered Dominion territory rather than just Cardassian, but they were more present than the Jem'Hadar forces. This one makes more sense to me as an area of space that was claimed by the Dominion during the conflict with the UFP, and then considered Cardassian space right along the Romulan neutral zone with the Federation. We know that for the early war, the Romulan Empire's neutrality with the Dominion was allowing their ships to pass through their space unimpeded, while still maintaining their long-standing hostility towards Starfleet interlopers. This would have included granting passage to Cardassian vessels, until the Romulans entered the war on the side of the Alpha Quadrant. This opened a new front in the Dominion War for the Gamma Empire, and suddenly they were in a less favourable position. Having a small territory along the northern border of the neutral zone that was Dominion Cardassian would go on to explain this sort of setup. By the end of the war, the Cardassian Union was in no state to antagonise anyone, and had even aided the alliance by turning on the Dominion. The Romulan Empire seems to have restored its sovereignty over any lost territory as the Cardassians pulled back, and for the most part it looks like this was an end of the two powers. Of course, now the Star Empire has fallen and been replaced with a number of smaller states, each with their own mandates and goals, so overall it looks like neither really came out on top. Perhaps they can both unify under the Federation in time, which at least seems to have attempted to aid each in times of crisis, despite the cost to itself. So that covers what the Romulan Star Empire and Cardassian Union think of each other, and an exploration of their relations in canon. I hope this video was an interesting watch, and until the next one, thanks again for watching. I've been Rick, and goodbye.